You know Wayne Manor, the way everyone does. The billionaire orphan, the loyal butler. A house built on tragedy, powered by vengeance. Home to the world's greatest detective.
The cave carved into bedrock, lights flickering over a pool of black water, where bats nest in the dark.
But that manor was keeping a secret long before Bruce Wayne ever put on the cowl, before Thomas and Martha died in that alley, before any Wayne took the vow to protect Gotham. The foundations of that house, the stones pulled from ruin and stacked on Bristol's highest ridge, were laid by a family that knew exactly what they were building on top of. Every tunnel beneath the floor, every sealed corridor winding through limestone, every locked door in the East Wing that Alfred pretends doesn't exist. They weren't accidents of architecture or happy discoveries made while chasing bats into the earth. Someone put them there. Someone planned it. But to understand what the Waynes buried under that house, you have to go back to the swampland Gotham itself was raised on.
Gotham was a mistake from the beginning. The first colonial settlers landed in 1635, built 17 structures along the marshes at the river's mouth, and within 8 months, every one of them was either dead or fled inland. The records called it fever. The letters that survived called it something else, something in the water that made men see things crawling in the fog. When they tried again in 1692, they moved the settlement 3 miles upstream, away from the worst of the wetlands. It took, barely. Gotham limped into existence as a trading port, where captains wouldn't dock after dark, where churches burned down twice as often as anywhere else in the colonies, where every 10 years, some new plague or fire or riot thinned the population just enough to keep the city small and bitter.
By 1780, the city had a reputation. Sailors wouldn't sign on for Gotham routes. Merchants marked up goods 20% just for the destination. Families that made it out swore they'd never go back. The ground itself seemed wrong, the angles of the streets refusing to run straight, the bedrock beneath the cobblestones honeycomb with caves no one remembered digging. But one family looked at that poisoned ground and saw not a warning, but an opportunity. The Waynes arrived in Gotham in 1783, just after the war ended, and the city was desperate for money and legitimacy. Charles Arwen Wayne brought both. English educated, impeccably dressed, a merchant fleet of 6 ships, and a private investment company that loaned to anyone willing to rebuild what the British had burned. Within 5 years, half of Gotham's waterfront carried Wayne credit. Charles built the first Wayne house in the financial district, a modest brownstone that signaled respectability without arrogance. His son, Nathaniel, expanded the shipping empire to 14 vessels and married into the Cobblepot family, which gave the Waynes access to Gotham's oldest bloodlines and the city council votes that came with them. By 1810, the Wayne name sat on the boards of every bank, every mill, every railroad proposal floated in back rooms over brandy. But the Waynes were careful. They built churches, endowed schools, funded orphanages in the Narrows, where smallpox ran through every winter. They positioned themselves as Gotham's moral anchor, the family that stayed when others fled, that reinvested when others extracted. Every public speech, every ribbon cutting, every charitable donation carefully recorded in the Gazette.
But it was one Wayne in particular, a hanging judge with a taste for stone, who would put the family on that hill for good. Solomon Wayne took the bench in 1855, age 38, already known for handing down maximum sentences with a steady hand. He campaigned on cleaning up the Bowery vice dens and actually did it, closing 47 gambling houses in his first 6 months. The Gazette called him incorruptible. His enemies called him the Stone Judge, and they meant it as an insult. But Solomon had the phrase carved above his courtroom door anyway.
What the public didn't know was that Solomon had stopped sleeping through the night in 1853. He'd wake at 3 a.m. hearing footsteps in empty hallways, smelling smoke that wasn't there. His wife found him twice standing at the window, staring at Bristol Township's dark hills. He never told her what he was looking for out there, but 6 months later he bought 11 acres on the highest point overlooking the city. The official story was simple. A judge of his stature deserved an estate to match, but Solomon's private journals, kept in the Wayne archives until 1974, tell a different story. He wrote about needing elevation, about distance, about walls thick enough that sound couldn't travel through. He sketched floor plans with rooms, inside rooms, staircases that doubled back. But Solomon couldn't raise the house he saw in his nightmares alone. He needed a man who could turn dread into architecture. Cyrus Pinkney arrived in Gotham in 1856 with a portfolio full of European cathedrals and a reputation for buildings that looked like they'd been standing for 500 years. He'd trained in Prague and Vienna, studying how Gothic spires made cities feel older, heavier, more permanent. Solomon hired him within a week of their first meeting, and Pinkney spent the next 3 years reshaping Gotham's skyline, one commission at a time. The Gotham Municipal Courthouse came first in 1857, all limestone and gargoyles, with a tower that could be seen from every borough. Then came the Mercantile Bank, the St. Swithin's Bell Tower, the original Arkham Administration Building. Pinkney gave Gotham a face that matched its reputation, stone saints and demons staring down at the streets. But every one of those public commissions was secondary to the project Pinkney worked on in private, the estate taking shape on Bristol's highest hill. The Wayne Manor blueprints, preserved at the Gotham Historical Society, show Pinkney's hand in every tower and arch, but they also show revisions in Solomon's tight script, notes in the margins that don't match the official story, annotations about load-bearing walls, about descending tunnels, about spaces that needed to remain hidden from surveyors and tax assessors alike. Instructions that were only strange until you saw what Pinkney was told to hide. Pinkney's Gotham Gothic became the city's signature style between 1857 and 1889. 114 major buildings across 4 boroughs. The style wasn't just decorative. Those spires created wind tunnels that kept smog moving, kept the air from stagnating the way it did in New York's factory districts. The gargoyles weren't just ornamental either. They were functional downspouts that kept water off the masonry, preserved the stone. Every element served 2 purposes: beauty and survival. But Wayne Manor was different from the start. While Pinkney's city buildings reached upward, all vertical ambition and visible grandeur, the Manor's design folded inward. The towers were there, yes, 3 of them in the final 1862 construction, but the real architectural focus was on the foundation. Walls 4 feet thick at ground level, 6 feet thick below grade. A wine cellar that descended 3 stories when most Gotham estates kept wine on the ground floor. Structural reinforcements that made sense only if you were expecting the ground itself to collapse. Pinkney built 19 other estates for Gotham's elite in that same period, and none of them shared the Manor's obsessive depth. The official explanation was flooding concerns, the hill's limestone composition, standard precautions. But limestone doesn't require triple reinforced foundation arches. It doesn't need walls thick enough to support a cathedral. The Manor wasn't built to look at the city. It was built to sit on top of something. Solomon Wayne didn't quarry fresh limestone from the hills west of the river. He bought the bones of Gotham's first attempts at permanence. The stone came from a failed courthouse on the docks, a warehouse fire that left only walls, and a church the congregation abandoned after 3 winters killed off half the faithful.
Reclaimed stone cost less, but that wasn't Solomon's calculus. Each block carried decades of weather and wear, gave the manor an instant gravitas that new construction couldn't fake. The limestone had soaked up salt air, wood smoke, the particular gray of Gotham rain. It looked like it had always been there.
The crew hauled 11,000 blocks up that hill between March and October of 1858. Cornerstones from a merchant hall, window lintels from a brothel the city council demolished to make room for a rail depot, foundation stones from a prison annex that collapsed under its own weight after 6 years. One block came from deeper, from a structure older than the municipal records could account for, stones that predated the grid itself. The masons noted it in their logs because it rang different under the chisel, a sound that traveled through bone. But the ground the Waynes chose mattered even more than the stone they used to cover it. The rise Solomon insisted on sat 287 feet above sea level, the second highest point within the city limits. From the crest you could see the harbor, the rail yards, the smoke from the foundries on Miller Island. It gave the Waynes a view of everything they were building their fortune on. But the hill itself was porous. The limestone bedrock underneath wasn't solid. It was laced with fissures, pockets, channels that rainwater had carved over millennia. The surveyors Solomon hired noted sinkholes on the eastern slope, depressions where the earth had swallowed itself. They recommended a different site. Solomon overruled them. He wanted that specific elevation, that exact orientation. The crew sank test holes to measure the bedrock, found voids at 40 feet, then 60, then depths their ropes couldn't reach. The geologists' report mentioned echoes, spaces large enough to return sound. No one had mapped what was down there. The caves weren't on any colonial survey, weren't marked in the indigenous trails the Dutch had copied for their first roads. Solomon knew. He'd walk the hill in winter when the snow melted unevenly, revealing the warm breath of the earth underneath. But when the first shovels hit that hillside, they broke through into a dark the Waynes never advertised. Construction started April 14th, 1858. 40 men hauling timber and stone up a grade that turned to mud every time it rained. Solomon was on site 6 days a week, sleeping in a foreman's shack rather than the townhouse on Dixon Street. He walked the foundation trenches every morning before the crew arrived, lantern in hand, checking the overnight progress. The stone went up fast once the foundation cured. 3 feet of wall per week, blocks set in mortar mixed with ash from the rail yards to speed the set. Solomon hired German masons who didn't ask questions, paid them $2.10 a day plus lodging, which was 40 cents above the going rate. They worked in shifts, some by lantern after dusk. By August, the walls were 12 feet high, and the crew had burned through 600 cords of scaffolding timber. The pace was punishing. Men slept on site, ate from the commissary wagon, sent their wages home to families they wouldn't see until winter froze the mortar. Solomon replaced 14 workers that summer, cited incompetence in the logs, paid severance that bought silence. The foundation went deeper than the plan showed. Trenches that should have stopped at bedrock kept going, reinforced with iron strapping and concrete that wouldn't be common in Gotham for another 20 years. The bills went through Solomon's private accounts, not the estate ledger. Materials delivered at night. Crews cycled out before they saw the shape of what they were building. But every stone laid was a stone, laid over something the family decided the world should never see. Construction took 3 years. The manor climbed skyward in stages, its Gothic silhouette assembling piece by piece against the Gotham fog. Twin towers framed the east and west wings, their spires topping out at 87 feet. The stone came dressed in numbers Solomon had written himself, laid in an order only he and the lead mason understood.
Inside, the halls branched and turned back on themselves. The main gallery stretched 140 feet, lined with alcoves that opened onto smaller passages. Some led to bedrooms, others to libraries stocked before the shelves were dry. A few corridors simply stopped, ending in blank walls or windows that looked onto interior courtyards no one could reach from the ground.
Guests who stayed the first winter got lost between dinner and bed. The architect's plans showed 32 rooms. The final count was 47, though Solomon never corrected the published number. But those dead-end corridors weren't mistakes. They were misdirection. The East Library held 1,400 volumes, most ordered from Europe before the foundation was poured. The portrait hall ran the length of the second floor, though only 6 paintings hung there in Solomon's lifetime. He commissioned the frames first, left the canvases empty. Visitors asked why. He told them the family was still being written.
The third floor had 9 bedrooms, but Solomon locked 3 of them the day the house was finished. No guests, no staff. When his wife asked what he was storing, he said paperwork. When the housekeeper found one of the doors ajar in 1862, she saw only an empty room, with walls papered in maps of Gotham, street names crossed out and redrawn in pencil. The West Wing had a door Solomon kept on his personal ring. Servants were told it led to a records room. It didn't. The lock was British, custom-ordered, the kind used in banks. But behind one locked door, Solomon kept a stair that went the wrong way, down.
The staff called it the quiet wing. No one was assigned to clean it. No oil lamps were lit there after dark. Solomon walked it alone, sometimes for hours, and came back with dirt on his shoes that didn't match the garden's. One maid swore she heard hammering from behind the locked door at 2 a.m. Another found a candle burning in the hall outside it, though no one admitted to lighting it. In 1863, a guest staying in the adjoining East Wing reported a draft so cold it woke him. He followed it to a baseboard vent and heard, faintly, the sound of water moving. When he mentioned it at breakfast, Solomon had the vent sealed that afternoon. The guest left early. The story spread anyway, small and quiet, the kind of rumor that sticks to old houses. Solomon never explained the wing, never toured it, never opened it, even when the house was shown to investors or city officials. His ledger listed it as storage, 420 square feet, windowless. But the servants who dusted the outside of the locked door said it was always cold to the touch, even in August. But that stair didn't end in a cellar. It ended in a cave no one had dug. The masons who poured the foundation in 1855 reported their tools striking hollow space 11 feet down. They'd expected bedrock. What they found was a limestone shelf honeycombed with voids, some as narrow as a fist, others wide enough to swallow a wagon.
Solomon Wayne ordered a survey. His engineer descended with rope and lantern and came back with a map showing 6 major chambers, 14 smaller grottos, and passageways that vanished into darkness his lamp couldn't reach. The largest cavern measured 90 feet across, its ceiling dripping with formations that had grown for 10,000 years.
The hill hadn't been chosen for its view. It had been chosen because it was already hollow, a natural vault beneath Gotham's wealthiest address. Solomon saw storage, wine cellars, a place to hide valuables from fires that regularly ate whole blocks of the city. But the Waynes weren't the first to walk those tunnels, and the signs of the others were still down there. The engineer's map showed only what his lantern could touch. The full system ran for over 2 miles beneath Wayne property, a maze carved by an underground river that still flowed through the deepest passage. In spring, the water rose 6 feet. In drought, it thinned to a whisper over stone. The bats came at dusk, thousands of them pouring from fissures in the hillside that no one had noticed before construction began. They roosted in the upper galleries, where the air stayed 54 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, their guano piling in drifts that the engineers shoveled out by the cartload. Solomon's workers sealed 9 natural openings to keep animals and vagrants out, but left 3 hidden exits along the river in case of cave-ins. One led to the bluffs overlooking the Gotham Straits. Another surfaced in a copse of black oak half a mile north. The third opened into a ravine the servants called Devil's Cut, where nothing grew and no one went after dark. But within a generation, those caves would carry something far more precious than bats: living people. By 1857, the locked wing had a second purpose. The cold room wasn't storage. It was a staging point. Families arrived after midnight, guided through the orchard by men who knew which floorboards didn't creak. The stair led down 40 feet. Then the tunnels took over. The Waynes ran a station on the northern route, sheltering people moving from Delaware through New Jersey toward New York and Canada. Some stayed 3 days, others 2 weeks, waiting for the next conductor or for bounty hunters to move on. They slept on pallets in the dry chambers, drank from the underground river, and moved only when the house above went dark.
Alan Wayne kept no record of numbers, only a leather journal noting supplies: 40 pounds flour, 12 blankets, lamp oil. But the servants who carried food down the stair later told their children they'd guided over 200 souls through those caves between 1857 and 1865. Some left carvings in the limestone, initials and dates, and single words: freedom, north, home. But hiding the desperate underground made powerful enemies who never forgot the Wayne name.
The route ran 3 miles through limestone chambers that twisted north under the city grid. Runaways followed chalk marks on the walls, moving only at night when the cave air carried no sound to the streets above. At the river's edge, false stonework hid a landing where boats waited, piloted by dock workers who asked no questions and remembered no faces. Solomon built 4 separate exits. One surfaced in the basement of a church on the north side. Another opened behind a waterfall 2 miles downstream. The third came up inside a barn owned by a Quaker family who kept lanterns burning in the window. The passages never appeared on any map, and the stone doors locked from the inside so no one could follow the route backward into the manor. For 11 years, the system moved over 200 people to freedom. Then the network went silent. Solomon sealed the cave entrances with brick and mortar, burned his journals, and never spoke of the tunnels again. But somewhere in Gotham, a quiet council of the powerful had started keeping a file on this troublesome family. Alan Wayne inherited the estate in 1855 with $470,000 in family money and a reputation his father had made dangerous. He was 23, Columbia educated, and built like a boxer. Within 2 years, he'd turned the fortune into steel contracts and railroad stock. By 30, he owned 6 factories, a shipping concern, and 14% of Gotham's waterfront. Where Solomon had hidden, Alan expanded. He bought the quarry that supplied stone for half the city's construction. He financed the bridge that connected Gotham to the mainland, then owned the toll roads on both sides. His name went on to hospitals, libraries, and the clock tower that still stands in old Gotham. The Waynes were no longer abolitionists in the shadows. They were the city's architects, and Alan made sure everyone knew it. He worked 16-hour days and slept 4 hours a night. His desk was always clear. His contracts were always signed ahead of schedule. But the richer Alan grew, the more certain he became that someone was hunting him.
Between 1870 and 1889, Alan Wayne built or financed 43 major structures in Gotham: the rail terminal that connected 6 interstate lines, the financial district's first 9-story tower, which required a new kind of steel frame Alan's foundries had to invent, the aqueduct that brought clean water from the northern hills, ending 3 decades of cholera outbreaks every summer. He didn't just fund construction. He walked every site, checked every blueprint, and installed infrastructure the city didn't know it needed yet. Subway tunnels were built 11 feet wider than the trains required. Bridges carried twice the load their permits specified. Foundations went 30 feet deeper than code demanded, and no one questioned it, because Alan Wayne's buildings never fell.
By 1890, you couldn't cross Gotham without stepping on something Alan had raised. His empire was concrete, steel, and stone. It was sewers, power lines, and the hidden framework that kept 400,000 people alive. But into the cornerstones of those very buildings, something terrible was being sealed.
Every Wayne building started the same way. A stone was cut, hollowed, and lowered into the foundation with a small ceremony, a handshake, a few words spoken over fresh mortar. It was ordinary practice for the era, the kind of thing every builder in Gotham did to bless a new address. But the men who worked Alan's sites started to talk. They said the cornerstone rituals ran late into the night, long after the crews went home, and that Alan insisted on being there for each one. He'd stand at the edge of the pit in the cold, watching the stone go down, and he wouldn't leave until it was sealed.
Some said the city was being marked, block by block, that the pattern of Wayne foundations spelled something only the men who laid them could feel. Alan started keeping a ledger of every stone, every date, every corner. He wasn't recording an empire. He was tracking something he believed was tracking him back. But Alan's fear wasn't madness, and the night he vanished would prove it.
The last winter of his life, Alan Wayne stopped sleeping. He bricked over windows in the Manor with his own hands. He wrote letters to associates about being followed, about faces at the tree line, about voices coming up through the floorboards at night. And he burned most of what he wrote before morning.
By January 1922, the man who built half of Gotham above ground was living below it. Neighbors reported him wandering the service tunnels and storm drains he'd financed decades earlier, muttering about the ones who lived in the walls. The city he raised had become the only place he felt safe, and the only place he felt hunted. Then, on a freezing night, he simply stopped appearing. No struggle at the Manor, no note, no body. The papers ran a small item about the aging railroad heir, presumed drowned in the sewers he loved too well, lost to old age and a wandering mind. But Alan wasn't gone. He was waiting to be found, entombed exactly where he most feared. It took decades. Generations passed. The Manor changed hands, and Alan Wayne became a portrait on a wall and a name on a foundation plaque. Then a demolition crew, tearing into an old Wayne-financed building, cracked open a cornerstone that never should have been hollow. Inside was Alan, or what the years had left of him, folded into the narrow cavity, sealed behind the stone he'd watched go down all those winters ago. The man who feared the cornerstones had ended up inside one, entombed in the very framework he built to protect the city. The medical examiners noted the impossible geometry of it. A grown man fitted into a space too small, the mortar undisturbed for a lifetime. It was a death dressed as an accident, a burial dressed as a foundation. But it was the small carved token near his bones that told the real story. The token was an owl, no larger than a coin, carved from bone. In the decades after Alan's disappearance, it showed up in 6 other Wayne construction sites, always near structural failures, always near men who'd been asking the wrong questions. The investigators called it a maker's mark, a builder's superstition, but the families of the dead knew better.
There were records, if you knew where to look. Board minutes where certain votes swung without explanation. Land deals that collapsed the day after a midnight meeting no one officially attended. Gotham's architecture itself seemed guided by an invisible hand, deciding which neighborhoods would thrive and which would rot, which families would rise and which would vanish into the city's shadows.
The Waynes had always been on the list, not as members, never as members, but as subjects. For 7 generations, every major Wayne decision had been observed, measured, occasionally redirected. When Nathaniel Wayne tried to open the waterfront to immigrant labor in 1891, his ship sank in calm water. When Solomon Wayne pushed for public housing reforms in 1923, the plans burned in a fire that somehow spared the rest of City Hall. Accidents, they called them, coincidences. But every child in Gotham already knew their sign. They just thought it was only a nursery rhyme.
Beware the Court of Owls that watches all the time, ruling Gotham from a shadowed perch, behind granite and lime. They watch you at your hearth. They watch you in your bed. Speak not a whispered word of them, or they'll send the talon for your head. Parents sang it at bedtime. Street kids chanted it while skipping rope. It was folklore, a ghost story, nothing more.
Except the court was real, had been real since Gotham was founded in 1635. A council of the city's oldest bloodlines, 13 families who decided Gotham's fate over brandy and sealed votes in a meeting hall no map acknowledged. They'd survived every reform movement, every investigation, every crusading mayor who thought they could clean up the city. Most of those mayors resigned. 3 of them disappeared. The Waynes were always the problem. Too wealthy to intimidate, too visible to quietly remove, too damn moral to buy. Alan Wayne's Underground Railroad had moved 340 people to freedom before they stopped him. His son Joshua had fought them in court for 11 years over tenement conditions. His grandson Cameron had publicly named 5 court members in a newspaper editorial in 1912, then retracted it 48 hours later, his hands shaking too hard to hold the pen. The Waynes had money, influence, a name that meant something to Gotham's people. But the court hadn't just watched the manor from afar. They had gotten inside it. Joshua Wayne, throat cut in his study in 1889, the windows locked from inside. His wife Amelia, institutionalized 6 months later, speaking in languages she'd never learned. Their son Darius, found frozen in the manor's garden in April, when the temperature hadn't dropped below 55 degrees Fahrenheit in 3 weeks. Cameron Wayne's daughter, stillborn with her umbilical cord in a knot the midwife swore was impossible. Patrick Wayne, dead at 32 from a heart that the autopsy showed was perfectly healthy. By 1920, Gotham society whispered about the Wayne curse the way they whispered about the court. Half joke, half prayer, you'd never have to test it. 9 Waynes dead before their time in 40 years. 4 more driven to madness or exile. The family tree read like a Gothic novel, each generation thinning, each heir burdened with the knowledge that their name came with an expiration date. The fortune grew, the tragedies multiplied, and the manor's east wing stayed locked because no one could bear to walk those halls anymore. The family consulted priests, mediums, doctors. They hired private investigators who found nothing. They renovated entire floors, thinking the house itself was sick. One Wayne burned his father's journals, trying to destroy whatever knowledge had drawn the curse. Another tried to give the fortune away, believing the money was poisoned. Nothing worked. The deaths continued, punctual as clockwork, creative in their cruelty. But a curse is just a pattern nobody's allowed to explain, and someone was drawing this one. The pattern held through the 1890s, the 1900s, the years that turned century into legend. Solomon Wayne's grandson lasted 11 years. His son made it to 9. The next heir, a quiet architect who'd hoped to renovate the East Wing, died in a fall from scaffolding after just 14 months. Each generation inherited the estate younger than the last. Each tried in their own way to break whatever held the house. One burned every stick of furniture older than 50 years. Another had the walls blessed by 3 different denominations. A third simply refused to sleep in the master bedroom, choosing instead a servant's quarters on the 3rd floor.
None of it mattered. The manor took them all, patient as stone. By 1920, the Wayne line had thinned to a single branch, the family tree more gaps than names. But by the time one gentle doctor inherited the keys, most of the old warnings had been forgotten.
Patrick Wayne was 47 when the house became his, older than any heir in 60 years. He'd spent his life in Boston, practicing medicine, barely aware he had claim to anything in Gotham. When the lawyers found him, he returned to a manor that had stood empty for 2 years, dust thick on every surface, the grounds gone wild. He cleaned it himself, room by room, and something strange happened. Nothing. No accidents. No sudden illnesses. No midnight falls. Patrick lived there 19 years, raised a family, hosted garden parties where Gotham's elite sipped tea on the south lawn. The old servants' whispers faded. The curse, people said, had finally run its course.
Maybe the house had simply tired of death, or maybe Patrick's gentle routines, his doctor's calm, had soothed whatever restless thing lived in the walls. The manor grew warm again. Children played in the hallways. Gotham forgot to be afraid of the Wayne name, but forgetting the danger is exactly how the danger gets close again. Patrick's son built the fortune into something that mattered. Not just wealth, real infrastructure. Wayne Enterprises poured $14 millions into Gotham General in 1952, another $8 million into public housing in the Narrows. The family name stopped meaning old money and started meaning hospitals, scholarships, the kind of power that actually fed people.
By the 1960s, the manor wasn't a haunted relic anymore. It was the place where Gotham's most important decisions happened, where mayors came to ask for endorsements, where charity galas raised enough in one night to fund a new wing at Arkham or a youth center in the East End. The Waynes had become the city's conscience, the family everyone pointed to when they needed proof Gotham could still be good. The fortune kept growing. Investments in shipping, pharmaceuticals, clean energy before anyone called it that. The board meetings ran smooth. The press loved them. And somewhere in all that light, the old shadows seemed to dissolve, as if money and goodwill could finally overwrite whatever blood the house remembered. But the man who would carry that fortune next cared far more about mending people than counting money. Thomas Wayne graduated top of his class from Johns Hopkins, turned down a dozen private practices in Manhattan and Philadelphia, and came home to Gotham General. He worked the charity ward 3 nights a week without pay. Gunshot wounds in the Bowery, broken bones in the Narrows, infections that should have killed people weeks before they finally dragged themselves through his door. The other surgeons called it slumming. Thomas called it practice. He sutured gang members next to dock workers, treated enforcer fractures the same day he set a senator's daughter's wrist. The waiting room didn't care who your father was, and neither did he. By 1973, he'd opened 4 free clinics in neighborhoods the city had written off, funded quietly through Wayne Enterprises. No press, no ribbon cuttings, just clean rooms, real medicine, and a doctor who showed up. The people remembered. But healing the city Gotham had given up on put a target on his back. He never noticed. Martha Kane came from old Gotham money, the kind that survived 6 generations by knowing when to look away. She didn't. At 19, she testified against her own uncle's real estate shell companies, the ones displacing entire blocks in the East End. At 23, she chaired the Gotham Mental Health Reform Coalition and went to war with Arkham's board over patient treatment standards. She funded 11 halfway houses, lobbied for housing code enforcement the city refused to pass, and personally audited charitable foundations that existed only on paper. The society pages loved her. The people who ran Gotham from back rooms did not.
She met Thomas at a fundraiser she'd organized for his clinics. They married 8 months later in a ceremony so small the press almost missed it. Together, they poured Wayne money into the cracks the city pretended didn't exist: surgery and housing, medicine and reform. Two people who believed Gotham could be saved if someone finally tried. But reform is only welcomed by those who don't profit from the rot.
The manor changed under them. The ballroom hosted fundraisers for battered women's shelters. The library became a planning room for housing initiatives. The gardens, so long pruned into lifeless symmetry, grew a little wild again, Martha's doing. For 5 years, Wayne Manor was exactly what the founders had promised it would be, a house that served the city instead of towering over it. Thomas operated 60 hours a week and still made it home for dinner. Martha turned down a Senate seat to focus on local reform, the kind that actually touched lives. They walked the grounds at night, made plans, believed in incremental change the way only people who've never been stopped believe. In 1974, Martha became pregnant. They repainted the nursery themselves, pale blue with white trim, and Thomas installed new locks on every door, the protective instinct of a man who'd seen what Gotham did to the vulnerable. For a moment, the house held something it hadn't in 140 years, an uncomplicated future. But the brightest years of Wayne Manor were already running out of time. Between 1973 and 1980, Wayne Manor became what Solomon Wayne had dreamed it could be, a center of gravity for Gotham's better impulses. Thomas and Martha hosted 14 major fundraisers in the ballroom, raising over $18,000 for hospitals, addiction clinics, and community medical centers in the Narrows and East End. The staff expanded to 9 full-time employees, each treated like family, each given profit-sharing stakes in the Wayne Foundation's charitable work. Alfred Pennyworth ran the house with military precision softened by genuine affection, and the couple trusted him with everything from scheduling to the house's oldest secrets. Photographs from that era show Thomas in shirt sleeves at the grand piano, Martha barefoot on the lawn, the kind of ease that only comes when you've stopped waiting for disaster. The manor's lights burned late most nights, filled with conversation and planning. Two people building something they believed would outlast them. They didn't know they had 7 years. But happiness in Gotham has always been the setup, never the ending. In the winter of 1978, a man in an owl mask stood in the sub-basement beneath Wayne Manor, exactly where Cyrus Pinkney had stood 142 years earlier. He wasn't there to build. He was there to confirm that what the court had buried was still waiting, still viable, still locked behind the seal. Thomas Wayne didn't know existed 40 feet below his wine cellar. The court's archival records from that period are fragments, but one entry is clear. The physician and his wife have made themselves obstacles. Succession protocols approved. Thomas had refused 3 separate invitations to join Gotham's oldest families in civic coordination, a euphemism the court used for candidates. Martha had publicly criticized Judge Edwin Lawton, a Talon handler, for his sentencing disparities in assault cases. The Waynes were too visible, too earnest, too convinced that transparency could survive in a city built on controlled shadows. They'd become the kind of liability the court had been erasing since 1778. The order was given in February 1979, but the court is patient and it prefers natural moments, incidents that Gotham's cynicism will accept without question. But before the court could close its hand, a new life arrived in that house and changed the calculation entirely.
Bruce Thomas Wayne was born at 4:17 a.m. on February 19, 1980, in the master bedroom of Wayne Manor, delivered by his father with Alfred and a midwife present. Martha had refused Gotham General, wanting her son's first breath to be in the house that would be his. The birth was smooth, the baby healthy, 7 pounds 11 ounces, and when Thomas placed him in Martha's arms, Alfred noted in his journal that the doctor wept without shame.
The nursery filled with gifts from across the city, hand-carved toys from the Narrows, blankets from families Thomas had treated for free, a mobile made of Gotham's skyline in miniature wood. For 6 weeks, the house was louder than it had been in a century, filled with the ordinary chaos of new parents learning how little sleep they'd actually need. Thomas read to Bruce every night from the same leather-bound collection his father had read to him, old adventure stories about explorers and inventors. The Court of Owls watched and recalculated. A Wayne heir changed the timeline, but not the outcome. They could wait 20 years, 30, until the boy became the man, and the family's influence either bent to the court's will or required permanent removal. The Waynes had no idea they'd just started a clock they couldn't see. But this child would inherit far more than a name and a house. Bruce Wayne spent his first 8 years running through those halls like they were built just for him. The library, with its sliding ladder, became a pirate ship. The ballroom's polished floor, a skating rink in socks. Thomas would find him in the portrait gallery, staring up at faces 200 years gone, asking which ones looked like him. Martha taught him to read in the conservatory, where light came through old glass in colors that don't exist anymore. Alfred let him help in the kitchen, measuring flour with hands too small for the cups. The boy had the run of 42 rooms, 6 staircases, and 14 acres of manicured ground. There was only one place his parents made him promise never to go. Past the hedge maze, near the property's eastern edge, an old stone well sat capped with rotting boards and a rusted chain. Thomas had shown it to him once, from a distance, and said some holes in the ground should stay closed. But every child eventually goes exactly where they're told not to. The well was older than the manor itself, part of the original farmstead the first Waynes bought in 1858, 4 feet across, fieldstone and mortar, with an iron cap someone had bolted down decades before Bruce was born. The bolts had rusted through by the time he found it on a Tuesday in October. He'd been chasing a rabbit. That's what 8-year-olds do. The animal vanished into the high grass near the estate's edge, and Bruce followed, pushing through brambles his mother would have pulled him back from. The well sat in a small clearing, sunken into the earth like the ground was trying to swallow it. The boards across the top were gray with rot, soft in places when he pressed them with his shoe. He could hear something down there, a sound like wind through a tunnel, though the air above was still. Bruce leaned over the edge, one hand on the cap, trying to see into the dark. But the day the boards over that well finally gave way, Bruce fell into the family's oldest secret. The drop was 20 feet. Bruce hit limestone, then rolled down a slope he couldn't see, the well opening into something much larger beneath. He landed on his back in total darkness, wind knocked out, ribs screaming, ankle twisted at an angle that would need 6 weeks in a cast. Then the air moved. Not wind, wings. Hundreds of them, thousands. A colony of bats that had lived in the cavern under Wayne Manor for longer than the family had owned it. They erupted from the walls in a sound like fabric tearing, a black cloud that filled the space and blotted out the circle of light above. Bruce screamed until his throat bled. The bats swarmed over him, leathery wings brushing his face, claws catching in his hair, their high-pitched cries drilling into his skull. He couldn't tell up from down, couldn't breathe without inhaling the stink of guano and rot. Alfred found him 11 minutes later, pulled him out with a rope and a flashlight, but the damage was done. But the terror of that fall didn't leave him when he was pulled out. It moved in, For months after, Bruce couldn't be in the dark without seeing wings. Not the cartoon kind, the real ones, leathery and skeletal, flapping in his peripheral vision the moment the lights went out. Thomas tried everything. Nightlights first, then stories about bats being harmless, then a trip to the Gotham Natural History Museum, where they stood in front of a taxidermied specimen for 20 minutes while his father explained echolocation.
None of it worked. The phobia had roots now, deep ones, tangled around the memory of falling and the certainty that something in the dark wanted him. Thomas even considered therapy, consulted 3 child psychologists, but Bruce refused to talk about it. He just learned to live smaller, avoiding basements, keeping every door in the manor open, sleeping with his curtains drawn back so moonlight could fill the room.
Thomas told Martha it would fade with time, that childhood fears always did. He was wrong about that, but he was right about something else. Fear that's strong doesn't disappear. It transforms. You either let it own you, or you learn to own it. But Thomas would not live long enough to see his son turn that fear into armor. April 26th started ordinary. Thomas closed the clinic at 4. Martha finished a donor call for the children's hospital, and Bruce spent the afternoon in the library with Alfred, reading Zorro for the 4th time. Dinner was early because the show started at 7:30. The Mark of Zorro at the Monarch Theater downtown. The same movie Bruce had been quoting all week. They took the roles, but Thomas drove it himself. No chauffeur, Martha in front with her pearls catching streetlight every time they passed under a lamp. Bruce remembers the marquee lights reflecting off the wet pavement, the smell of popcorn in the lobby, the way his parents laughed at something during the newsreel. It was the kind of night that feels unremarkable while it's happening, the kind you forget unless it's the last one. The movie ended at 9:47. They stepped out onto a Gotham street slick with spring rain, Thomas's hand on Bruce's shoulder, Martha adjusting her coat. The car was parked 6 blocks east, an easy walk through a part of the city the Waynes had walked 100 times before. But the way home led through the one street in Gotham where the city's promise always broke. Park Row after dark earned its nickname a decade before the Waynes walked into it. Crime Alley, the papers called it, where 3 shootings had happened that year alone, and the streetlights stayed broken because the city had stopped sending repair crews. Thomas knew the reputation, but the detour added 15 minutes, and Bruce was tired, and it was only 6 blocks, so they turned in. The alley narrowed between a pawn shop and a boarded-up theater, brick walls pressing close, the rain turning to mist under a single working bulb 40 feet up. Their footsteps echoed. Somewhere ahead, a door slammed, and then a shape stepped out from a recessed doorway 20 feet down, hands in his coat pockets, shoulders hunched, blocking the path forward. Thomas stopped. Martha's hand tightened on her purse. Bruce looked up at his father and saw something he'd never seen before. Hesitation. The man didn't say anything at first, just stood there under the fizzing light, eyes flicking between Thomas's watch and Martha's necklace. Then his right hand came out of his pocket, and the metal caught the glow. And everything that came after happened in 90 seconds. But whether that gunman found them by chance or by design is a question that still haunts Gotham. Thomas moved first, stepping forward with both palms out, voice low and steady. The gun came up level with his chest. He asked the man to take it all, watch and wallet and rings, just let them walk away. The first shot echoed off brick and glass, a crack that flattened every other sound in the alley. Thomas went down hard, and Martha's scream tore through the silence before the second shot cut it short. The pearls scattered across wet pavement, 47 of them bouncing and rolling into the gutter, while Bruce stood 6 feet away, rooted to the spot, watching his parents bleed out on the stones. The gunman ran east toward Park Row, footsteps fading into the grid. Police found the scene 4 minutes later. By morning, every paper in Gotham carried the story, and by week's end, 3 different men had confessed. The GCPD closed the case twice, reopened it 4 times, and never quite agreed on which suspect pulled the trigger or why he'd been in that alley at all. But the man who pulled the trigger would never be the whole answer. Bruce didn't remember the ambulance or the ride to GCPD headquarters. What stayed was the image burned into his retinas. His mother's pearls on black asphalt, white against dark, some still rolling, some already still. The necklace had been strung on silk thread, a single strand his father gave her on their 10th anniversary. One pearl landed in a storm drain. Another came to rest against his father's outstretched hand. A detective picked up 19 of them and dropped them into an evidence bag while Bruce sat on the hood of a patrol car, wrapped in an officer's jacket, staring at nothing. The rest were swept away or pocketed or ground into the pavement by morning traffic.
Years later, he'd find one in a crack between cobblestones when he returned to the alley. He kept it in a drawer in the cave, the last physical piece of that night, a reminder of what the city took and what it cost. The image of those scattered pearls never left him. It would surface in dreams, in the moment before every fight, in the quiet seconds before he put on the cowl.
But out of that gutter of broken pearls, something new was already forming in a child's mind. The manor Bruce came home to wasn't the same house. The halls stretched longer, ceilings climbed higher, every room echoed. He walked through the east wing at 3 a.m, 8 years old in pajamas, opening doors to guest rooms that would never see guests again. His parents' bedrooms stayed closed for 2 weeks before he finally pushed the door open and stood in the doorway, unable to cross the threshold. Meals were silent. The staff spoke in whispers. Lawyers arrived in dark suits, spread papers across the study desk, explained trusts and estates and guardianship in voices that sounded like they were coming from underwater. Bruce sat in the chair his father used to sit in, feet dangling 8 inches off the floor, signing nothing, understanding less.
At night, the house settled and creaked, and every sound was his mother's footsteps in the hall or his father's hand on the library door. The chandeliers stayed dark. The curtains stayed drawn. Wayne Manor had 42 rooms, and Bruce was alone in every single one of them. A boy in a mansion built for a family that no longer existed. But one man refused to let either the boy or the house go dark. Alfred Pennyworth became Bruce's legal guardian 72 hours after the funeral. He'd served the Wayne family for 16 years, first as Thomas's valet, then as the manor's head of staff when the household grew. The courts barely questioned it.
He kept the boy fed, kept the lights on in the east wing where Bruce slept, kept the staff down to a skeleton crew of 3 when it had once been 11. Every morning at 7:15 he knocked on Bruce's door. Every evening at 6 he set a place for dinner whether Bruce came down or not. Alfred never tried to be Thomas. He didn't fill the silence with false cheer or force the boy to talk. He just stayed, a quiet anchor in a house that wanted to drift into memory. He polished silver no one would use, maintained gardens no one walked through, kept the clocks wound in rooms no one entered. What Bruce didn't know was that Alfred had chosen this. He could have walked away, taken a position in London, returned to a life the boy knew nothing about. But Alfred had secrets of his own, and a reason he understood the manor's shadows so well. The house became a cathedral of routine. Bruce attended Gotham Academy during the day, sat through classes in a uniform that cost more than most families made in a month. At night, he wandered 42 rooms that echoed with footsteps that weren't his parents'. Alfred maintained the entire estate with 2 part-time groundskeepers and a housekeeper who came Tuesdays and Fridays. He cooked meals Bruce barely touched, ironed school clothes Bruce wore like armor, drove him in the Rolls his father used to drive. The boy spoke less and less. By age 10, he could go 3 days without saying more than 12 words. The library became Bruce's refuge. Thomas's medical journals stacked beside criminology texts Bruce checked out from the public archive downtown. Alfred found him there most nights, asleep at the desk under a lamp that burned until dawn. He'd carry the boy upstairs, lay a blanket over him, never ask what he'd been reading. To anyone watching, it looked like grief, slowly healing into normalcy. A tragedy the city had moved past. A boy learning to live with loss. But in the silence of that house, a boy made a promise no child should have to keep. Bruce knelt in his father's study 11 months after the murders and swore an oath to their memory. Not out loud. He didn't have words for it yet, but the promise carved itself into him like something physical, a vow that replaced whatever childhood he had left. He would dedicate his life, his fortune, his body to a single purpose. He would wage war on all criminals, on the rot that let men like Joe Chill walk Gotham's streets with guns and greed. He would become something the city had never seen, something that could make the killers and thieves and cowards afraid the way he'd been afraid in that alley. It wasn't justice he wanted. Justice had failed his parents in a trial that took 90 days and ended with Chill serving 8 years in Blackgate before parole. It was something older than justice, something Gotham understood in its bones. He would become the thing that answered screams in the dark. At 11 years old, Bruce Wayne had no idea how to keep that promise. He had money, a name, a legacy, and rage that had nowhere to go. But a vow is only a wish until you find a way to make yourself dangerous enough to keep it.
For the next 7 years, Bruce Wayne became a ghost in his own house. He disappeared into the East Wing library for days at a time, pulling down books on criminology, forensic science, human anatomy. Alfred brought meals on silver trays and found them untouched beside open volumes on toxicology and the physiology of fear.
Gotham society pages whispered about the traumatized heir who never left the estate, who turned down every gala invitation, every charity board seat his parents had once held. They assumed he was broken. They were half right. The boy was studying 14 hours a day, building a map of violence in his mind, but his body was still soft. His hands had never thrown a real punch, and rage alone wouldn't stop a bullet. On his 18th birthday, Alfred found a note on the breakfast table. 4 words, "I'll be back. Prepared." The Rolls-Royce sat in the garage. Bruce's passport was gone. His trust fund showed a single wire transfer, $50,000, to an account in Hong Kong. But one day the boy simply walked out of Wayne Manor, and Gotham thought it had lost him for good. For 12 years, Bruce Wayne vanished from every database that mattered. No credit cards, no hotel registrations under his name. The Wayne Foundation lawyers received a single instruction through an encrypted relay. Keep the manor staffed. Keep Alfred paid. Touch nothing else. Gotham's tabloids ran the occasional, "Where is Bruce Wayne?" piece, usually next to photos of playboys on yachts in Monaco. They had no idea he was sleeping in a Serbian monastery with a broken rib, learning to move without sound. Alfred kept the manor like a mausoleum. He dusted the library where Bruce had spent those silent years. He maintained Thomas Wayne's study exactly as it had been the night of the murder, down to the fountain pen still uncapped on the desk. Every 6 months, a postcard arrived from a different city with no return address, no message, just Bruce's signature. Tokyo, Cairo, Mumbai, Berlin. The handwriting changed over the years, grew harder, more controlled. Gotham assumed the Wayne heir had become another rich expatriate, wasting his inheritance in European casinos or Himalayan ashrams. The truth was simpler and more dangerous. Bruce Wayne had erased himself so he could be rebuilt into something Gotham had never seen. But across the world, the boy was hunting the skills his vow demanded. He started in the dojos of Tokyo, studying under Kirigi for 9 months until his knuckles split open daily and healed thick as leather. Ninjutsu, karate, jujitsu, the brutal efficiency of Muay Thai in the fighting pits of Bangkok, where you fought until someone couldn't stand. In Paris, he apprenticed with a master thief named Ducard, learning to crack 19th century safes and read a room's security in 3 seconds. He studied manhunting with a tracker in the Pamir Mountains, who could follow a week-old trail through snow. He learned 12 languages, enough to pass as a native speaker in the criminal underworlds from Sao Paulo to Moscow. A chemist in Switzerland taught him poisons and their antidotes. A stage magician in Prague showed him misdirection, the art of making 200 people look left while you vanish right. He spent 8 months in a Tibetan monastery, learning to control his breath, his heartbeat, to function on 90 minutes of sleep, and hold his body still for hours, in sub-zero cold. By year 10, he'd become 7 different people, each with a backstory deep enough to fool Interpol. He'd been a dock worker in Marseille, a bouncer in Kyoto, a driver for a Romanian arms dealer. Every identity was a lie that taught him how criminals think, how they move, how they justify what they do. He could kill a man in 11 different ways, and had chosen, in each training, not to. But the hardest lesson he learned abroad was the one that finally sent him home.
He came home in the spring of his 26th year. The plane touched down at 11:47 p.m., and he drove himself from the airport because he didn't want Alfred to see him yet, didn't want to explain the scar along his ribs or the way his hands shook when they weren't holding a weapon. Wayne Manor looked smaller than he remembered. The East Wing lights were on, which meant Alfred had waited up the way he always did. But Bruce sat in the car for 19 minutes before he could make himself walk through the door. He'd mastered 127 different combat techniques across 6 continents. He could disappear into a crowd in Bangkok, pick a lock in under 8 seconds, read a crime scene the way his father once read medical charts. But Gotham's streets still bled the same. The same addicts in the same alleys, the same dealers on the same corners, the same police sirens wailing through the same indifferent night.
Skill wasn't enough. Fear was the only currency criminals understood, and he had nothing that made them afraid. But standing in his family's halls, he realized he'd learned how to fight and still had no idea how to win.
3 weeks after his return, Bruce tried it without the symbol. Black clothes, a ski mask, nothing that meant anything. He stopped a mugging in the Bowery, and the man he saved asked if he was a cop.
The mugger he'd left zip-tied for GCPD laughed when they cut him loose 14 minutes later. No charges filed. The victim never showed for the statement. Bruce came home with 2 cracked ribs and blood on his shirt that might have been his, sat in his father's study while Alfred cleaned the wound in silence. The study still smelled like his father's cigars, even though Thomas Wayne had been dead for 18 years. Bruce pulled every book on criminology, psychology, symbology, tribal warfare. He read about the samurai who wore demon masks, the Spartans who painted their shields with Medusa, the tribes who carved their gods into weapons. Alfred brought tea at 2:47 a.m. and found him staring at the window, still bleeding through the fresh bandage. The old man asked what he was looking for. Bruce said he didn't know, but the answer he couldn't find in any book was about to fly straight into the room. The bat hit the glass at 3:12 a.m., not a gentle tap, but a full-body collision that cracked the pane and sent the animal tumbling onto the Persian rug between his father's desk and the empty chair. It was disoriented, wings spread, teeth bared. Bruce didn't move. He'd seen bats before, heard them in the eaves as a child, but this one held still and looked at him with eyes that caught the lamplight like mirrors. His heart hammered the way it did when he was 8 years old and falling, the darkness rising to meet him, the sound of 1,000 wings. The symbol had been there all along, not in the books or the training or the masks other men wore. It was the thing that had broken him, the primal image that lived in the space between nightmare and waking. Criminals were a cowardly and superstitious lot, his father once said. They needed to see their fear made flesh. The bat righted itself and flew back through the broken window into the Gotham night. Bruce sat in the dark for another hour, not moving, barely breathing, watching the shape of the idea take form. But to become the thing he feared, he had to go back down to where the fear was born. The next morning, Bruce descended into the Manor's oldest wing, following blueprints his grandfather had annotated in 1937. The servant passages ran behind the walls like a second skeleton, narrow stairs dropping floor by floor toward the foundation. Thomas Wayne had sealed the lowest access in 1989 after a groundskeeper reported structural concerns. But the iron door still hung on its hinges, rusted shut for 16 years. Bruce brought a crowbar and a flashlight. The door shrieked open on the third pull, releasing air that hadn't moved in nearly 2 decades. The passage beyond sloped down through limestone, hand-cut sometime before the Civil War, the chisel marks still visible in the beam. It took 40 minutes of walking, sometimes crouched, before the tunnel opened, and the air changed. The smell hit first, guano and whetstone and something older, mineral and cold. Then the sound of water echoing off surfaces too far away to see. Bruce stepped through the final archway into open space, sweeping the flashlight across a darkness that swallowed the beam before it found a wall. But what he found underground was far bigger than the well he'd fallen into as a boy. The cavern stretched 200 feet across, maybe more. Stalactites hung from a ceiling Bruce couldn't see, and the underground river he remembered as a child ran along the eastern wall, black water moving without a sound. The bats were there, thousands of them roosting in the high dark, their bodies packed so tight they looked like a second stone layer. Bruce walked the perimeter for an hour, mapping the space in his head. 3 natural chambers connected by stone arches worn smooth by centuries of water. A flat shelf of rock near the center, 60 feet wide, elevated 4 feet above the waterline. Stable ground, dry ground, hidden 90 feet below Wayne Manor with no access except the passage he'd just opened. He found the rusted remains of a lantern near the river's edge, the glass long shattered. Further in, a timber beam rotted down to splinters, iron nails still embedded in the stone where someone had mounted it decades or centuries before. Initials carved into the limestone near the western arch, too weathered to read but deliberately cut, 6 inches tall. But scattered in the dark were signs that he was not the first Wayne to make this place a refuge. Bruce stood on the central shelf and turned a full circle, seeing it complete. The fear that had paralyzed him at 8 years old, the nightmare he'd carried for 17 years, was about to become the weapon. The cave would be his armory, his laboratory, his training ground, the place Gotham forgot, hidden beneath the house Gotham watched. He marked the coordinates in a notebook Alfred would never see, measured the distance from the tunnel entrance to the shelf, the height of the ceiling where it was visible, the depth of the river, calculated load-bearing capacity, ventilation routes, power line proximity. The bats wheeled overhead in agitated spirals, disturbed by the light, but Bruce didn't move. He'd spent 7 years learning to fight in the world's hardest places. Now he had the one place no one would ever look. When he climbed back up to the manor 3 hours later, the plan was already forming. Generators, computers, a medical station, room for vehicles if he could widen the tunnel and reinforce the approach. Everything invisible, everything deniable, everything beneath the mansion where 4 generations of Waynes had hosted Gotham's elite and never mentioned the dark below. But turning a bat-infested cavern into a war room would take everything the Wayne fortune could quietly buy. The first crews came in at night, hired through 3 shell companies Alfred registered in Delaware, each contractor working on a different piece of the puzzle. One team poured reinforced concrete platforms into the bedrock. Another ran fiber optic lines and 480-volt power feeds down through the mansion's original foundation, disguised as routine electrical upgrades.
Bruce himself welded the steel frame for the main computer terminal, working 16-hour shifts in a welding mask while the bats screamed overhead. The elevator shaft dropped 140 feet through limestone, its entrance hidden behind a grandfather clock in the study. The mechanism triggered by setting the hands to 10:47, the exact time Thomas and Martha Wayne were pronounced dead.
A secondary vehicle ramp spiraled up to a camouflaged exit 2 miles from the manor, the tunnel mouth concealed behind a false rock face near the Gotham River. Every invoice, every permit, every delivery was routed through legitimate Wayne Foundation construction projects across the city. The cave took 11 months to build, but a secret that size needs at least one other person who knows how to keep it. The first machine to arrive was a forensics computer Bruce built himself, its processors running facial recognition software, 8 years ahead of anything the GCPD had access to. Then came the prototype vehicle, a modified Lamborghini with armor plating and a jet turbine that could hit 205 miles per hour on the straight stretches of Gotham's industrial district. The trophy cases started filling in the 3rd month. A Joker card recovered from the Axis chemical fire. Riddler's first cane, snapped in half during a rooftop fight in Old Gotham. Each object was catalogued, sealed in UV-protected glass, a museum of violence only 2 people would ever see.
By year 2, the cave had 47 separate systems running simultaneously, drawing enough power to light a city block, all of it masked by the mansion's legitimate electrical load. Bruce spent 6 hours a night down there, sometimes more. Alfred would find him at the terminal at 4 a.m., still in the suit, blood drying on his knuckles, cross-referencing crime scene photos with Arkham intake records. But the deeper Bruce built into the cave, the more he vanished from the man Alfred had raised. Alfred Pennyworth became the only living person who knew Bruce Wayne and Batman were the same man. He learned field medicine from a Royal Army manual, stitching knife wounds at the steel table Bruce installed near the medical bay, his hands steady, even when Bruce's weren't. He memorized 14 different cover stories for Bruce's absences, told them to board members and journalists, and the occasional concerned friend, with the same unshakable calm he'd used briefing MI6 officers 30 years earlier. Some nights, Bruce came back so broken Alfred had to carry him to the table. Cracked ribs, dislocated shoulders, a skull fracture that required 3 weeks of supervised rest Bruce ignored after 4 days. Alfred kept a journal in a locked drawer upstairs, entries written in a code he'd learned in the service, documenting injuries the world could never know about.
He was 63 years old. He could have retired to the cottage in Sussex his pension had paid for, could have walked away from the boy who'd become a stranger in a mask. Instead, he stayed in the manor, kept the secret, watched Bruce disappear into the dark every night, and prayed he'd see him again before dawn. But Alfred stayed because he understood what the boy was really trying to bury down there. Within 18 months, the transformation was complete. Upstairs, the manor remained what Gotham society expected. 42 rooms of mahogany and marble, charity galas twice a year, the young billionaire playing his part with practiced ease.
Below, behind a grandfather clock that opened on a 6-digit code only 2 people knew, a different architecture had taken shape. The natural limestone cave system Bruce had first descended into now held a crime lab, an armory, a vehicle bay carved 60 feet into bedrock, and a mainframe drawing power through lines the city thought fed an indoor pool that had never been built.
The guests who wandered the East Wing gardens never heard the engine tests 90 feet beneath their shoes. The reporters who photographed Bruce Wayne's book-lined study never noticed the faint vibration when the platform elevator descended through 7 stories of stone. It was a perfect inversion, a lie told in architecture. But in carving out his fortress, Bruce had disturbed layers of the family's history he didn't yet know were there. The first sign came 4 months in, when the drill crew broke through into a passage that didn't match any survey map. Brick-lined, 8 feet high, running north toward the river. The mortar dated to the 1850s. Bruce found 11 more over the next year. Tunnels sealed with iron grates, alcoves carved too deliberately to be natural erosion, marks scratched into stone that looked like tally counts. One chamber held rusted chains still bolted to the wall. The railroad, he realized. His family's manor had been a station, the caves a final passage north. But some of the tunnels went deeper, older, their walls showing chisel marks from before the Civil War. Then he found the passage that had been sealed with concrete and rebar, not century-old brick. Someone had wanted it closed within the last 50 years. When he broke through, the air that escaped smelled like earth and old copper. But one symbol pressed into the deep stone belonged to a group he'd only ever heard of in a children's rhyme. Beware the Court of Owls. That watches all the time. He'd learned it as a child. A Gotham ghost story parents used to keep kids from wandering after dark. But the owl carved into the limestone 200 feet below his study wasn't a nursery rhyme. It marked a chamber his sonar mapping showed extended another 80 feet into unmapped rock. The walls inside were worked stone, not natural cave, and the air tasted different, filtered somehow. Someone had built down here long before the Waynes ever broke ground on the manor. Bruce found 3 more owl marks over the next 6 weeks, each one leading deeper into passages his equipment said shouldn't exist under this part of the city. One tunnel ran directly beneath the foundations of buildings erected in 1802. Another intersected a municipal water main that the city's own records showed had been installed 40 feet higher. The caves weren't just a hiding place he'd claimed for his war. They were the bottom layer of something older, a city beneath the city, and the court had used them long before a boy in a mask ever descended looking for shadows to fight from. But following that symbol into the deeper dark meant unearthing the reason his family had been hunted for 100 years. April 12th. The first patrol lasted 4 hours and 37 minutes. He returned through the cave entrance at 3:18 a.m. with 2 cracked ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and blood on the cowl that wasn't his. Alfred met him at the limestone threshold with a medical kit already open. The costume came off in pieces under the manor's foundation. Bruce sat on bare rock while Alfred set the shoulder without anesthetic, neither of them speaking about what had just changed. Above them, Wayne Manor slept. Below, something else had been born. By dawn, they'd installed a steel footlocker for the suit, a folding cot, and a portable generator powering 3 work lamps. The cave's natural acoustics swallowed every sound. No servant would hear the welding at 4 a.m. No groundskeeper would notice the tire tracks leading to a service gate that opened onto the cliffs. Within a week, the cot became a permanent bed. Within 2, a radio scanner and a city map pinned to the cave wall, red pins marking every location he'd worked. The transformation wasn't deliberate, it was inevitable. But 1 cave and 1 costume weren't nearly enough for what Gotham would demand. Alfred requisitioned equipment through 11 different shell companies. A forensics workbench arrived as surveying equipment for a fictional mining survey. The first computer terminal came disguised as archival storage hardware for the Wayne Foundation. A vehicle lift was billed to a restoration project for Thomas Wayne's car collection that didn't exist.
The cave grew in layers. Bruce carved out a vehicle bay wide enough for the prototype he was building in a rented garage 40 miles outside the city. Alfred installed a ventilation system that vented through 6 different chimneys across the estate, each outlet disguised as routine heating exhaust. The crime lab came next, spectrometry and chromatography hidden under tarps, powered by a secondary generator buried 200 feet deeper.
By year 2, the cave had running water, climate control, and a medical station where Alfred could perform field surgery without calling a hospital that would ask questions. The workbench held tools for 47 different trades. The computer could access 9 law enforcement databases and 3 that officially didn't exist.
Above ground, the Manor's routines never changed. Bruce Wayne hosted charity galas in the ballroom while 80 feet below, evidence from 6 active cases dried under UV lamps. The staff noticed nothing. The city noticed nothing. The Manor's dual life held until the night an enemy followed him home. The Riddler left 3 clues across Gotham on a Thursday in October, each one leading to the next. The final answer pointed to a location Batman had visited twice that month. But the real riddle was the question Nigma never asked out loud. Where does the bat go when the hunt is done? Bruce didn't see the tracker. A magnetized disc the size of a dime, attached to the underside of the Cowl's utility belt during a rooftop confrontation. The signal was clean, the range was 12 miles, and it led Riddler's hired men straight to the cliffs below Wayne Manor at 4:47 a.m.
They didn't breach the cave. Alfred caught them on the new perimeter cameras 400 yards out. 6 men with climbing gear and enough firepower to crack a bank vault. Bruce intercepted them in full costume 90 seconds later, but the damage was done. Someone had connected the location. Someone had aimed hired guns at the foundation of everything he'd built.
The security audit took 11 days. Every approach to the estate, every sightline, every route he'd ever taken home. Alfred installed motion sensors in a 2-mile radius, pressure plates under every access road, and a fail-safe that would collapse the cave's primary entrance if someone unauthorized tried to force it. But walls and sensors weren't enough. The Manor had to remain what it had always appeared to be, a museum to old money and older tragedy. Gotham's elite couldn't know the house had become a bunker. Bruce Wayne threw parties the way other men threw punches, calculated, deliberate, designed to leave an impression. The guest lists read like Gotham's social register. 200 names, $500 plates, champagne that cost more per bottle than most families earned in a month. The ballroom filled with laughter and small talk about markets and summer homes. Photographers captured Bruce with a different socialite every hour, the playboy heir too shallow to care about anything but his next distraction. It was a performance refined over years, every careless smile and tipsy toast meticulously rehearsed.
What the guests didn't see was the study on the 2nd floor, doors locked, monitors glowing behind antique oak panels. Bruce would excuse himself between courses, 4 minutes at a time, checking police frequencies and tracking movement in the Narrows. The Manor's public face smiled and drank. Its real face never blinked.
While champagne flowed upstairs, something darker was being built 3 floors down. The war room didn't start as a room at all. It started as a folding table and a police scanner, then a wall of maps marked in red ink. By 1998, it had grown into 14 monitors, spanning 11 feet of reinforced wall, fed by 347 cameras scattered across 9 districts.
Every screen told a story, traffic patterns shifting near the docks at 2 a.m., a warehouse in Otisburg going dark 3 nights in a row, GCPD dispatch codes that meant officer down, shots fired, suspect fleeing on foot. The system learned to flag anomalies, cross-reference license plates, map crime density in real time.
Alfred called it the panopticon. Bruce called it necessary. From this room, he could see Gotham breathe, watch her heart rate spike when fear took hold. The Manor had become more than a base. It had become the city's unseen watchtower, a fortress built not just to hide one man's war, but to wage it with precision. But technology can't stop every threat, especially the ones already inside.
Dick Grayson arrived on a Tuesday in March, carrying nothing but a duffel bag and a grief too big for a 12-year-old to hold. Bruce gave him the East Wing guest room, 18 feet by 22, with windows that overlooked the gardens. The boy didn't speak for 3 days. The Manor changed in small ways first. Alfred started cooking breakfast again, real breakfast, not just coffee. Lights stayed on past midnight in rooms that had been dark for years. Dick found the library on day 6, the garage on day 9, and by week 3 he'd mapped the accessible floors with the thoroughness of someone looking for exits. Bruce watched him move through the halls and saw something he'd forgotten the Manor could be. Not a mausoleum or a bunker, but a home. The acrobat's instincts were sharp, his questions sharper. How many cars does one person need? Why are there cameras in the foyer? What's behind the grandfather clock?
The boy brought light to the halls, and with it, questions Bruce couldn't answer.
Dick found the cave on his own. He followed the wrong corridor at the wrong hour, heard the hydraulics hum beneath stone, and took the stairs Bruce had forgotten to lock. By the time Bruce reached the platform, the boy was standing at the console, batsuit draped over the chair, and the question on his lips wasn't why, but how long have you been doing this alone? The confrontation lasted 6 hours. Bruce tried threats, then silence, then the truth, that the mission was a death sentence, and the Manor was a monument to failure. Dick said he'd already buried his parents once. He wasn't going to watch another father walk into the dark without him. Bruce gave him a week of training before the first patrol, 3 months before the colors, a year before he stopped checking the tracker every 11 seconds. The cave carved out a second workstation. The Manor hung a new set of keys by the kitchen door, and Alfred pressed a costume into a glass case with hands that shook just slightly. One robin wasn't the end. It was the blueprint. Jason Todd left scuff marks on the marble and cigarette burns on the east balcony railing. Tim Drake rewired the security grid in his first month and left coffee rings on 16th century side tables. Damian Wayne arrived with a sword, a bloodline, and a conviction that the Manor was his by birthright before it was ever Bruce's by inheritance. Each boy claimed a bedroom, a corner of the cave, a version of the mission that didn't quite match the one before. Jason's room faced the cliffs. Tim built a server farm in the old wine cellar. Damian mounted his mother's tapestries in the West Wing and kept a menagerie in the conservatory until Alfred discovered the bats weren't the only endangered species nesting in the rafters. The Manor became louder, footsteps at 3 a.m. that weren't Bruce's, arguments over patrol routes in the hall, laughter occasionally echoing up from the cave when a plan worked or a villain went down swinging. The house that had been a mausoleum became something close to a barracks. then something closer to a home. Not all of them survived what the manor asked of them. Jason's bedroom stayed exactly as he left it. Bed made, books stacked by publication date, a jacket slung over the chair that still smelled like Gotham rain and cheap diner coffee 6 months after the funeral. Bruce locked the door in year 1. Alfred unlocked it in year 2 and dusted every week as if the boy might come home and notice. The case in the cave stayed dark. No spotlight, no plaque, just an empty uniform behind glass that everyone walked past without speaking. Tim never asked why. Damien asked once and got silence sharp enough to draw blood. Dick stood in front of it some nights, cape still dripping from patrol, and the manor's lighting grid would flicker like it couldn't decide whether to comfort or confess.
The house remembered violence, but it had never buried a child before. The trophy room's laughter felt wrong afterward. The training hall's impact sounded too much like the warehouse recordings Bruce played on loop for 11 months until Alfred physically removed the equipment. Every creak in the floorboards became a weight the manor couldn't distribute, every shadow a reminder that the mission had costs the architecture couldn't absorb. The dead, in Gotham, don't always stay buried, even in memory. Barbara Gordon didn't ask permission to build the network. She installed the first relay in the Manor's East Telecommunications Junction in 1998, routing Oracle traffic through Wayne Enterprises' fiber backbone without telling Bruce for 6 weeks. By the time he noticed the 47 terabyte spike in monthly data transfer, she'd already linked the clock tower, the Batcave, and 11 safe houses across Gotham into a real-time intelligence grid that made Bruce's standalone systems look like analog relics.
The manor became Node Alpha in a web that stretched from Bludhaven to Metropolis. Encrypted comms bounced through its servers every 90 seconds. Dick called in pursuit vectors from rooftops in the Diamond District. Helena reported Bertinelli family movements from the Bowery. Tim cross-referenced Riddler ciphers against GCPD case files Alfred had been digitizing since 1952, all of it flowing through Barbara's hub in what used to be the third-floor study where Thomas Wayne once practiced his surgical sutures on cadaver hands. Bruce stood in the doorway one night and watched 8 screens cycle through live feeds from across the city. Oracle's voice guided Huntress through a warehouse extraction while simultaneously feeding Batgirl encrypted schematics of a Falcone safe house and fact-checking one of Tim's theories about Scarecrow's new toxin compound. The mission had outgrown him. The manor's walls held more voices than Bruce ever intended. The trophy room sits 40 feet below the main cave, behind a titanium door with a biometric lock keyed to Bruce's palm print and retinal scan. No one else enters. 73 objects line the walls in climate-controlled cases, each one a piece of Gotham's worst nights. Two-Face's original 1922 silver dollar, scarred on one side by acid Harvey Dent threw at his own reflection. The Joker's first calling card, creased where Gordon's hand shook when he bagged it as evidence in 1989. Poison Ivy's dried rose from the Botanical Gardens siege. Bane's shattered venom tube. Bruce couldn't destroy them. He tried once with the Scarecrow's original fear toxin canister, brought it to the cave's incinerator, stood there for 11 minutes with his finger on the ignition switch. Alfred found him frozen, still holding it. The objects were evidence, yes, but they were also something else. Proof that he'd survived nights he shouldn't have. Reminders of every choice that led to a body bag or a hospital wing or a child in a costume standing beside him. The Riddler's cane, the Penguin's umbrella, a shard of mirror from the Mad Hatter's lair. Bruce walked the room on the anniversary of Jason's death every year, alone, counting the cases like rosary beads. Each artifact still carried weight, still radiated the violence of the night it was taken. Some memories, Bruce learned, were safer locked away than destroyed. Selina Kyle first entered Wayne Manor through the second-floor terrace in 1993, bypassing $400,000 in security upgrades Bruce had installed the month prior. She left a note on his pillow. "Your perimeter's sloppier than your left hook." She didn't steal anything that night. The next time, she did. A 14th century Persian manuscript from Thomas Wayne's collection. Bruce found it returned to the library 3 days later with another note tucked inside. "Disappointing read. You should get better books." The East Wing became hers by unspoken agreement. The guest suite with a private entrance and the balcony that overlooked the gardens. She stayed 11 nights over 2 years. Bruce never asked her to. She appeared after particularly brutal patrols, after the nights when Gotham took more than it gave, after he came back with broken ribs or shrapnel wounds, or the kind of exhaustion that made the cave feel like a tomb. She didn't ask questions. She didn't try to fix anything. She was just there, and then she wasn't.
Alfred left coffee outside her door on the mornings she stayed, French roast in the blue porcelain cup, and she always left the cup washed and returned to the kitchen before she disappeared over the east wall. Bruce found cat hair on the guest suite pillows. Her perfume lingered in the hallways for hours. She knew the Manor's floor plan better than most of the family did, knew which boards creaked and which hallways Alfred monitored, and where the camera blind spots were. She walked through the Manor like she owned it, and maybe, in a way, she did. In a vault 9 levels beneath the cave, behind biometric locks and lead-lined walls, Bruce kept files on every member of the Justice League. Kryptonite variants cross-referenced by isotope, Flash's caloric thresholds and metabolic weak points, Wonder Woman's psychological triggers, mapped from 47 observed combat scenarios.
The protocols weren't abstract. Each folder contained step-by-step instructions, delivery systems, dosages, contingency timelines. Clark's file was 134 pages. Diana's was 89. Hal Jordan's contingency involved a yellow fear toxin Alfred had synthesized and stored in a cryo-safe below the wine cellar.
Bruce reviewed them quarterly, updated threat assessments after every mission, every power fluctuation, every lapse in judgment he cataloged. He told himself it was necessary, that someone had to think about what happened if Superman stopped pulling punches, if Arthur decided the surface world wasn't worth saving, if Junon rewrote a few inconvenient memories.
The rest of the family didn't know the vault existed. Alfred knew and said nothing. Trust, even among heroes, had limits Bruce couldn't ignore. The earthquake hit at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in winter, magnitude 7.6, epicenter 11 miles south of the Manor. The East Wing collapsed in 40 seconds. The library's oak floors buckled and dropped 2 stories into a sub-basement no one had entered in 60 years.
Alfred pulled Dick and Tim from the rubble near the collapsed staircase. Bruce was already in the cave when the first tremor hit, watching monitors flicker and die as Gotham's power grid shredded itself. The trophy room caved in, burying the giant penny under 9 tons of limestone and rebar.
The cave held. The servers stayed online. The generators kicked in. The structural pylons Bruce had reinforced in Aero 3 kept the main chamber intact. But the Manor above was gone. 3 centuries of Wayne history reduced to split beams and shattered glass. The portrait of Thomas and Martha Wayne lay face down in the mud, frame cracked, canvas torn. For 6 days, the family operated from the cave while Gotham burned. Then the bulldozers arrived, insurance adjusters, contractors with blueprints and cost estimates. Standing in the ruins, Bruce faced a question: restore the past or build something new? The new manor rose in 14 months, faster than anyone expected. Same footprint, same Gothic facade, but the bones underneath were different. Reinforced concrete where wood beams used to be, ballistic glass in every window, pressure sensors embedded in the foundation every 6 feet. Bruce added 4 additional sublevels beneath the cave. Redundant power grids, water filtration that could sustain 12 people for 8 months, blast doors rated for tactical nuclear yields. The library was rebuilt with hidden server banks behind false walls. The dining room table sat over a retractable platform that dropped into an armory. The family moved back in, but the hallways felt wider, colder. Rooms that used to creak now sat silent under soundproofing and climate control. Dick commented once that it felt like living in a museum designed by DARPA. Tim said it reminded him of a submarine, all function and no warmth. Alfred kept Thomas Wayne's old smoking jacket in his quarters, one of the few things pulled intact from the rubble. He never wore it. The new manor kept everyone safer and more isolated.
The clock tower fell on a Tuesday. Spy Smasher's Black Ops team hit it with incendiaries at 3:47 a.m., and by dawn, Barbara Gordon's entire Oracle network was ash and melted servers. She'd built that operation over 6 years, every redundancy, every encrypted line, gone in under 11 minutes. Bruce didn't ask. He routed her through the Batcave systems that same morning, gave her 3 sublevels in the manor's east wing, and had Lucius install quantum-encrypted relays by the weekend. Barbara's intel network now ran through the same foundation as Batman's files, the same servers that held every contingency plan and every secret identity in the Bat family.
She tried to compartmentalize it. Separate drives, air-gapped backups, kill switches on every terminal. But the truth was simpler and worse. One breach now touched everything. One mistake didn't just burn Oracle. It burned Robin, Nightwing, Red Hood, every operator she'd ever guided through a rooftop chase or a hostage extraction. The manor had always been a fortress. Now it was a server farm with 200 years of stone around it. With every addition, the manor became a bigger target. Damian Wayne arrived with a sword, a bloodline, and no patience for the family Bruce had built without him. 10 years old, trained by assassins. He walked into the manor like he was reclaiming occupied territory, because in his mind, he was Bruce's son, the heir, not adopted, not chosen, born. He took the room closest to Bruce's. He didn't ask. Dick tried to smooth it over, Tim bristled, and Alfred watched the boy with the careful neutrality of a man who'd seen this house survive worse. Damian dismissed the others as pretenders, street kids playing dress-up in a legacy that belonged to him by blood. He was 10 and he was right enough to be dangerous.
Bruce gave him space, gave him training, gave him the Robin suit, which broke something in Tim Drake that never quite healed. The manor's hierarchy rewrote itself around the boy. Every dynamic shifted by 6 inches to make room for someone who refused to ask for room. He studied the cave, the files, the armory. He memorized patrol routes and contingency plans.
And at night, when the others were on patrol, Damian explored. The old wine cellar, the sealed tunnels, the foundation stones that predated Gotham itself. The boy was blood, but that made him more dangerous, not less.
Ra's al Ghul came for the manor on a winter night with 40 League of Shadows operatives and a blueprint stolen from Amadeus Arkham's private papers. Not a raid, a surgical strike. They knew which walls were load-bearing, which tunnels led to the cave, which generators powered the defense grid. They knew because Ra's had been planning this for 30 years. The attack lasted 19 minutes. League soldiers breached through the old smuggler's tunnels, the ones even Bruce thought he'd sealed. They set charges on the cave's support columns, flooded 3 sublevels with gas, and fought their way to the manor's central staircase. Nightwing took a blade to the ribs. Damien fought beside his grandfather's men, then against them. Bruce held the main hall alone for 4 minutes while Alfred evacuated the files. Roz stood in the foyer, surrounded by smoke and broken stone, and told Bruce the house would fall. Not today, but soon, because it was built on a lie, on a secret the Waynes had kept for 8 generations. He smiled when he said it. He didn't elaborate. They drove the League back, sealed the tunnels with explosive charges, spent 3 days sweeping for stragglers and hidden devices. But Roz had made his point. He'd walked into the Batcave, touched the walls, and left. The attack exposed something Bruce himself had never known was buried there. Roz didn't explain how he'd known about the tunnels. He simply sent Bruce the proof. Architectural drawings dated 1795, stamped with the League of Shadows cipher. The original foundation work, the first excavation beneath what would become Wayne Manor, had been supervised by League engineers. They'd directed the placement of every load-bearing wall, every descending passage.
The Waynes thought they were hiring European stonemasons. They were hiring Ra's al Ghul's ancestors. For 200 years, the family had lived above corridors designed by the very organization Bruce had sworn to destroy. The betrayal wasn't recent. It was structural. Bruce pulled the Manor's oldest blueprints from the archives and compared them against Ra's documents. The match was perfect, down to the angle of a support beam in the wine cellar. But the League drawings showed additional chambers, deeper tunnels, spaces that didn't appear on any Wayne record. The Manor's history, it turned out, was older and darker than the Waynes themselves. He found the charts in a lead-lined box beneath the foundation's northeast corner, exactly where Roz said they'd be. Parchment maps, ink faded to rust, showing Gotham's bedrock in geological cross-section. 12 sites marked in Arabic script, each one noting depth, mineral composition, water table proximity, Lazarus Pit locations. Some exhausted, some dormant, one active. The active site sat directly beneath the coordinates of Wayne Manor. Not approximate, exact. The hill had been chosen because of what lay under it, not despite it. Every generation of Waynes had unknowingly built their legacy atop a pool of resurrection, drawn to the spot by forces they couldn't name. The madness that seeped through Gotham's streets had a source, and it was pooling 90 feet below Bruce's childhood bedroom. The maps included construction notes, methods for capping or channeling the pit's energy. The League hadn't just found these sites. They'd managed them, controlled them, used them to shape cities for centuries. Gotham wasn't random chaos. It was cultivated. The Waynes hadn't chosen this ground by accident, and neither had those who came before. The excavation took 6 days. Bruce worked alone, drilling through limestone and shale, following the maps down past the Batcave's deepest sub-level. At 87 feet, he hit water. At 91 feet, the drill bit came back glowing faint green. The pit wasn't large, maybe 15 feet across, fed by an underground spring that had been filtering through mineral deposits for millennia. The surface was still, luminescent, cold to the touch. Every test Bruce ran confirmed it. Cellular regeneration factors identical to Ra's samples. Half-life readings suggesting the source had been active for over 4,000 years. This wasn't a Lazarus Pit. This was the Lazarus Pit, the oldest documented site, the one Ra's had spent 3 centuries searching for. And the Waynes had been living on top of it since 1795, breathing air touched by its vapor, drinking water filtered through its runoff. It explained things. Thomas Wayne's obsession with saving Gotham despite every rational reason to leave. The city's refusal to die no matter how deep the rot went. Bruce's own inability to quit, to ever stop, to let the mission end. The pit didn't just resurrect bodies. It resurrected purpose, again and again, in everyone who came near it. Bruce stood at the edge of resurrection itself, buried under his childhood home. Bruce made his choice in the dark. The pit would stay, but it would never be used again. He commissioned the final expansion of the cave, not to explore deeper, but to contain what lay beneath. Concrete barriers, lead-lined walls, 3 separate seals between the lowest chamber and the rest of the cave. Alfred supervised the construction personally, never asking why his employer was burying a fortune in Lazarus water under reinforced stone.
The power to undo death sat 40 feet below the Bat computer. Every time someone he loved fell, every time he held a body in his arms, Bruce would know the resurrection pool was there, waiting, offering.
Sealing the pit meant accepting that some losses would be permanent.
The Court of Owls came back 6 months later, not as whispers or rumors this time. They arrived with deeds, maps older than Gotham's incorporation, and 14 Talons who walked through the Manor's front door at 3 a.m.
Their claim was simple. Wayne Manor sat on the court's original assembly ground, built over chambers the organization had used since 1798. The property, they argued, had never legally belonged to the Wayne family at all. Bruce fought them in the cave, in the halls, in the gardens where his parents used to walk. The Talons moved like they knew every room, every passage, every weak point in the structure. They did. The court had designed half of them. The war for the manor lasted 11 days. Then Bruce found the archive his grandfather had hidden in the East Wing's foundation, and everything stopped. The Waynes and the Owls, it turned out, shared more than just history. The documents were clear. Patrick Wayne, Bruce's great-great-grandfather, hadn't just known about the court. He'd sat on their inner council from 1871 to 1889, voting on which Gotham families lived and which disappeared into the harbor. The Wayne fortune that built hospitals and funded orphanages started with court contracts, shipping routes the Talons protected, real estate acquired after convenient fires. The manor itself was constructed on land the court had seized, then granted to Patrick as payment for 18 years of service. But something changed in 1889. Patrick turned. He exposed 7 court members to the press, burned their record halls, and built Wayne Manor as a fortress against them. Every tunnel, every hidden room, every reinforced wall was designed to keep the Owls out of what they considered theirs. Bruce had spent his entire life honoring the Wayne name, building on his family's legacy of justice and protection. The truth was simpler and darker. His ancestors had been the very thing he'd sworn to fight. Everything Bruce built on his family's name rested on a lie. Bruce made a choice that night in the archives. He couldn't erase what the Waynes had been, couldn't rewrite centuries of blood and conspiracy, but he could decide what the name would mean going forward.
Every criminal he stopped, every life he saved, every night he spent in the cave was an act of defiance against his own lineage. The manor would no longer be a monument to Gotham's hidden rot. It would be the place where that rot was fought, room by room, year by year.
He told Alfred the truth that morning. The butler listened in silence, then poured the tea and returned to his duties. Some legacies, he said, are inherited. Others are earned. Bruce had been earning his since the night his parents died.
The weight didn't lift, but it shifted. The court's symbols stayed carved in the stone. The Lazarus maps remained sealed in the vault. Evidence, reminder, fuel. The manor had survived centuries of secrets, but it had never faced Bane.
He came through the front door. Not the cave, not a window. Bane walked up the drive in broad daylight and rang the bell. By the time Alfred reached the foyer, 6 of Arkham's most dangerous inmates were already inside. The assault lasted 19 hours. They tore through the east wing, shattered the conservatory glass, set fire to the library Bruce's father had built. Bane knew the house's layout, knew which walls were load-bearing, knew where the cave entrance sat beneath the study. Someone had given him the plans. Bruce fought room to room, bleeding, exhausted, running on fumes and willpower. He'd spent 3 months chasing every escaped inmate across Gotham. No sleep, no recovery. Bane had planned it that way. When they finally met in the cave, Bruce could barely stand. The sound echoed up through the manor's foundation. A crack, a scream. Bane left him on the stone floor, spine shattered, and walked back up the stairs. With Bruce broken, the manor fell silent until someone else descended into the cave. Jean-Paul Valley didn't inherit the manor. He claimed it. Bruce was gone, shipped to a clinic overseas, and Gotham needed a Batman. Valley had the training, the armor, the will. What he didn't have was Bruce's restraint. The changes started small. Surveillance upgrades in every hallway. Weapon racks where bookshelves had stood. The cave's workstations rearranged for efficiency, not comfort. Alfred watched in silence as the manor's warmth bled away, replaced by cold steel and red emergency lighting.
Valley patrolled from the cave 16 hours a day, monitoring 140 feeds across Gotham, deploying drones Bruce had never activated. The manor became a fortress, bristling and watchful. Criminals he caught didn't always make it to GCPD. Some just vanished. The library Bruce's grandfather built, the one that survived Bane's assault, Valley converted into an armory. Flamethrowers mounted on the walls, shuriken launchers in the ceiling, every room a potential kill box. The manor reflected its master, and this master brought only fire. Bruce came back broken but determined, his spine rebuilt, his will hardened by months of recovery. The manor had become Azrael's fortress, every corridor a trap, every shadow hiding blades. The fight tore through 3 floors, Wayne history shredded under gunfire. The library where Thomas once read to his son became a war zone, first editions reduced to ash. The cave itself, split between 2 Batmen, one trying to save what remained, the other burning it all down. Bruce didn't fight to kill. He fought to exhaust, to outlast, to prove that being Batman meant more than brutality. Azrael collapsed in the Batcave at 4:17 a.m., his armor cracked, his programming finally breaking against Bruce's refusal to become him.
When the smoke cleared, the manor stood, but it would never be the same. The East Wing never got rebuilt. 47 rooms left as skeletal frames, open to Gotham's weather. Alfred suggested restoration 6 times in the first year. Bruce refused each time. The ballroom where Martha Wayne once hosted charity galas stayed gutted. Walls scorched black, chandeliers fallen, floor tiles cracked in spiderweb patterns. Contractors presented blueprints. Bruce filed them away untouched. He walked those ruined hallways some nights, running his hand along charred wood. The destruction wasn't Azrael's doing alone. It was Bruce's, too, for choosing someone who could burn so hot, for believing control could replace trust. Other sections got repaired. The kitchen, the study, the living quarters. But the East Wing remained frozen in the moment Bruce lost his identity, a permanent scar cutting through 200 years of Wayne architecture. Bruce kept the ruins visible, a monument to the cost of losing himself. December 1999, a 7.6 magnitude earthquake tore Gotham in half. The federal government declared it unsalvageable and sealed every bridge, every tunnel. No man's land, they called it. 3 months of isolation turned into 12. Bruce left the manor in February, not damaged by the quake, just abandoned. He walked into the city's ruins and didn't look back. Wayne Manor sat empty on its hill, while Gotham descended into tribal warfare below, warlords carving the city into territories. Alfred stayed in the cave for 6 weeks, then retreated to England. The grand rooms gathered dust. Rain leaked through the East Wing's unrepaired roof. Security systems cycled through their routines, motion sensors sweeping empty hallways, finding nothing.
For a full year, no light burned in Wayne Manor. Bruce fought in the streets, slept in safe houses, bled in back alleys. The family estate became irrelevant, a relic of a Gotham that no longer existed.
The manor sat empty, but something in the cave never stopped watching.
Before Bruce left Gotham to the gangs and the federal government, he made one final calculation. If the city sealed itself off, if no man's land became permanent, someone still needed to watch. So he programmed the cave's mainframe to run autonomous surveillance. Facial recognition sweeps across 47 hardened cameras, motion sensors calibrated to flag patterns consistent with mass violence.
The system wasn't sentient, but it learned. Every night it cataloged movement in the ruins, cross-referenced known criminals against blurry footage, and flagged anomalies. It couldn't intervene, but it could record. It archived 11 months of data, while the manor sat dark overhead, power drawn from the geothermal grid Thomas Wayne installed in 1947. What Bruce didn't account for was drift. Small errors compounding across weeks without calibration. By month 8, the system began tagging civilians as threats based on walking speed alone. It locked down cave entrances 3 times, sealing routes Bruce would need to escape. The logs showed it nearly activated the emergency flood protocol, the one designed to collapse the tunnels if the cave was ever breached by hostile forces. Machines, Bruce learned too late, can't tell the difference between protection and control. When the bridges reopened in late 1999, Bruce walked back into Wayne Manor through the front door. 374 days of dust covered every surface. The East Wing windows were shattered from looters who found nothing worth taking. Alfred's kitchen still smelled faintly of the last meal he'd prepared before the evacuation, bread gone to mold in a sealed container. Bruce spent the first week alone, methodically clearing rooms, replacing what was broken, leaving what was scarred. He didn't hire a crew. The work was deliberate, almost meditative. Each repaired banister and reglazed window was a choice to stay, to rebuild something other than armor and contingency plans. The cave came back online in stages. He wiped the surveillance AI, kept the cameras, disabled every automated lockdown. The new network was simpler, dumber, requiring human input at every step. Upstairs, he left Thomas and Martha's portraits where they'd always hung, but he cleared out Bruce's childhood bedroom and converted it to something else. A guest room, maybe. Space for someone who wasn't a ghost. The house was his again, and this time he wasn't going to face it alone. By 2000, Wayne Manor had a heartbeat again. Dick Grayson moved back from Bludevin for 3 months to help coordinate Gotham's reconstruction efforts, taking the second-floor guest suite Thomas once used for visiting surgeons. Tim Drake commuted from Bristol on weekends, his files and case notes spreading across the library Bruce's father built. Barbara Gordon ran Oracle operations from a secure room Alfred converted in the Manor's north wing. 8-monitor array hardwired to a satellite uplink. Alfred returned last, stepping off a flight from London with a single bag and a quiet smile. Dinner became a nightly ritual again. Not every night, not everyone at once, but enough. Enough voices in the halls. Enough dishes in the sink. Enough moments when the cave felt less like a tomb and more like a headquarters where people actually worked together.
For 18 months, the manor was what it should have been from the start. A base, yes, but also a home. Training happened in the cave, but planning happened at the dining table. Injuries got treated in the medical bay, but recovery happened in the library, with Alfred's tea and Dick's terrible jokes. The scars were still there, in the walls and in the people, but the house breathed again.
The family grew, and with it the weight of expectations no one could carry.
When Bruce fell, the house didn't just lose its owner. It became the prize in a war no one wanted to fight. Jason Todd walked the halls with guns. Tim Drake searched for proof Bruce wasn't dead. And Dick Grayson tried to hold the family together while Gotham tore itself apart. The manor's east wing became Jason's armory. The study became Tim's war room. And the cave became the thing they all wanted, and none of them could claim without blood. For 3 weeks the house stood empty at night, because every heir was in the city, fighting under different symbols, different rules. Damien watched from the shadows, 10 years old, and certain the mantle belonged to him by birth. The fights came home eventually. Fists through drywall in the training room, shouting matches in the cave, and Alfred cleaning up broken glass in the gallery, where Thomas and Martha's portrait hung, silent witnesses to their legacy eating itself alive. Dick took the cowl, not because he wanted it, but because Gotham needed someone, and Jason's methods would have drowned the city in bodies. He put on the suit in the cave's center platform, the same spot Bruce used for 17 years, and the weight of it nearly crushed him. The Batcave held a new master, but the manor remembered only one. Dick Grayson didn't move into the master bedroom. He kept his old room in the east wing, the one with the trapeze poster still on the wall and the window that looked out over the grounds. He patrolled as Batman, trained Damien as Robin, and came home to a house that had spent 20 years holding its breath. Alfred noticed it first. Dick left lights on. He played music in the gym. He ate breakfast in the kitchen instead of taking a tray to the cave. The manor's staff, reduced to a skeleton crew under Bruce, slowly returned. The gardens got tended again. The ballroom, unused since the 80s, got cleaned for a charity event Dick actually attended. Damien hated it at first, this softness creeping into the house, until he realized the training sessions in the cave didn't stop. They just didn't feel like punishment anymore. Dick ran the Batcave like Bruce, methodical and relentless, but he ran the manor like a home. For 11 months, Gotham had a Batman who smiled, who brought Tim and Damien together for movie nights in the theater room, who let Alfred rest. The mission didn't suffer. The city stayed safe. But the house transformed. Shutters opened. Dust covers came off furniture. The library saw more use in a year than it had in a decade. For the first time in decades, laughter echoed in the manor's halls, and then Bruce came home. Bruce didn't ask for the cowl back. He'd been lost in time, fought his way through centuries, and when he finally made it to the cave's entrance, he found Dick still wearing it. The conversation happened in the study, not the cave, and it lasted 4 minutes. Dick offered to step down. Bruce told him Gotham needed 2 Batmen now, that the city had grown too large for one symbol. The manor suddenly held 2 dark knights under one roof.
They split the mission geographically. Dick took Gotham proper, Bruce went global with Batman Incorporated, and the manor became operational headquarters for both. The cave's computer systems got partitioned. The training schedule doubled. Damien stayed with Dick, the partnership that actually worked, while Bruce recruited operatives across 47 cities. Some nights, both cowls hung in the cave. Some nights, neither did. Both men in the field, and Alfred alone in the manor, wondering how long the house could sustain this pace.
It worked for 8 months. The family dinners became tactical briefings. The library became a secure communications hub. Tim operated from the Gotham suburbs. Jason stayed distant but occasionally checked in, and the manor buzzed with an energy it hadn't known since Thomas Wayne's tenure as surgeon and philanthropist. 2 generations of Batman, one legacy, one impossible standard. The manor had room for both, but Gotham, as always, demanded more.
Then the universe folded. Barry Allen touched the Speed Force in 2011 and reality rewrote itself around a single desperate act. A mother saved, a timeline collapsed. When Bruce Wayne woke in the new world, the manor stood on the same hill. Its stones the same gray, its gates the same iron. But the photographs in the East Wing hallway hung in different frames. Alfred noticed nothing. Dick arrived for dinner and spoke of childhood memories Bruce didn't share, a training regimen in the cave that had never happened, not in the world Bruce remembered. The library held books Thomas Wayne had never owned. The garden maze followed a pattern Martha had never designed. Every room whispered a history Bruce alone knew was wrong. He descended to the cave that night and found the equipment exactly where he'd left it. The computers running the same protocols, the Batmobile in its bay. But the deeper vault, the one only he could access, held a leather journal in his father's hand. The entries dated back 40 years. Thomas Wayne had written about the Court of Owls. The house stood where it always had, but its history had been rewritten.
The new 52 Manor carried the same murder in its foundation. Thomas and Martha still died in Crime Alley on that June night. The pearls still scattered across wet pavement. Bruce still knelt beside their bodies. But the decades between then and now had been redrawn. The Court of Owls had always been there, sleeping in Gotham's architecture, their talons buried in walls across the city. And they'd touched Wayne Manor long before Bruce was born.
Thomas Wayne had discovered them. The journal entries traced his investigation, hidden consultations. A secret war fought in hospital corridors and charity galas. He'd found their nests, mapped their reach, documented their resurrection technology. Then he died, and the court had waited. They'd watched Bruce grow, watched him become Batman, watched him build his cave beneath the house his father had tried to turn into a fortress. Bruce read the journal 3 times, searching for proof, for some evidence his father had actually written these words, that this history had actually happened. The handwriting matched, the paper aged correctly. Alfred confirmed the events, remembered Thomas working late, remembered the tension in those final months. But Bruce's memories held none of it. He remembered a surgeon, a philanthropist, a father, not a man at war with Gotham's oldest conspiracy. Bruce walked halls he'd known his entire life, haunted by the sense they'd never existed. The Joker came to the manor in 2012 wearing his own face as a mask, the skin surgically removed and reattached, held in place with a leather strap, and madness. He walked through the front door during a power outage Alfred had not caused, moved through corridors he should not have known, arrived in the cave while the family slept upstairs. He left a tape recorder on the computer console. "I know who you all are. I've always known." Death of the family lasted 19 days. The Joker poisoned the manor's water supply, left Joker toxin in Alfred's tea kettle, rigged the grandfather clock with a booby trap that nearly killed Tim. He broadcasted from the cave itself, from angles that suggested he'd been inside before, many times, watching. He spoke about Damien's bedtime routine, about Barbara's favorite chair in the study, about the way Dick always entered through the second-floor balcony. Every secret laid bare, every identity a plaything.
Bruce evacuated the family and searched the manor alone for 6 days. Every room, every passage, every hidden door he'd installed, and every hidden door he'd inherited. The Joker had been everywhere, traced smiley faces on the walls, behind paintings, left playing cards in the silver drawer, the attic trunk, Thomas's study safe. But he'd left the cave mostly untouched, as if that part bored him, as if he'd already taken what he came for. The clown walked out alive and took something Bruce didn't know was missing.
The Joker's toxins spread through Gotham's underground like poison in the roots. Batman tracked him to the caverns beneath the city, prehistoric chambers that predated Wayne Manor itself by 10,000 years. The final fight played out in darkness and dripping stone, while above ground Alfred coordinated evacuations, turned the Manor's communications array into a command center for every cape and badge still standing. Bruce won, if you can call it that. The cave collapsed. Search teams pulled rubble for 3 days and found the Joker's body, but not Batman's. Commissioner Gordon held a private service. 47 people attended, none of them wearing a cape, all of them knowing exactly who they were bearing.
Alfred locked the front doors at 11:00 p.m. on a Tuesday. He walked every hallway, turned off every light except the foyer chandelier. In the cave, the monitors still cycled through Gotham's traffic cameras. The waterfall still ran. The bats still nested in the upper vaults. When the dust settled, Alfred stood alone in a house built for ghosts.
He kept the schedule Thomas Wayne had kept, the one Bruce had kept. Breakfast at 7, even if no one came down to eat it. Fresh flowers in Martha's sitting room every Monday. The grandfather clock wound every Sunday night, its mechanism oiled, its hands precise. Wayne Enterprises lawyers came with paperwork. The board wanted to sell. Investors worried about optics, the estate too large for one aging butler. Alfred signed nothing. He repaired the ballroom's parquet where Boots had scuffed it during a fundraiser 6 months prior. He cataloged the library, all 12,000 volumes, cross-referenced against Thomas's original acquisition logs from 1952. Nights he spent in the cave, not patrolling, just maintaining. Calibrated the Bat computer's processors, restocked the medical bay, ran diagnostics on suits no one would wear. The work filled hours, but not the silence. The Manor waited, as it always had, and eventually, Wayne came home. Bruce walked through the front door on a Thursday morning, 6 months gone. Alive but not intact. The cave collapse had erased years, left him with fragments, muscle memory without context. He knew the Manor's floor plan, but not why. Recognized Alfred's face, but couldn't place the name for 3 days.
They rebuilt it room by room. The study where Thomas taught him chess. The garage where he'd rebuilt his first motorcycle at 16. The training hall in the East Wing. Mats still bearing the impression of 10,000 falls. Each space triggered something. Snapshots that slowly formed a sequence. A boy to a man to a symbol.
The costume came back last. Bruce stood in the cave, held the cowl, and remembered not just what it was, but why it had to be. Alfred watched from the stairs, didn't speak, didn't need to. The city's heartbeat pulsed through the monitors again, and Bruce turned toward it like he'd never left. Bruce wasn't the only one rebuilding a life in those halls. The invitations went out in July. Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle, married on the grounds at sunset. Alfred oversaw every detail, converted the East Ballroom into a gallery of their years together, commissioned a string quartet from Vienna. The gardens were trimmed to perfection, every path lit with paper lanterns that would guide 300 guests through the most private night Wayne Manor had ever hosted. Selina's dress hung in the master suite for 6 days. Then she left a note on the pillow, walked out the front door at 4 a.m. and didn't look back. Holly Robinson had whispered the truth in her ear, that happiness would destroy him, that a Batman at peace was a Batman who failed. Selina believed her. The wedding never happened. Bruce found the note at dawn. Alfred dismantled the ballroom in silence, returned the chairs, the flowers, the Vienna Quartet's deposit. The dress stayed in the closet for 3 weeks before Alfred finally moved it to storage, tissue-wrapped, a future that died on the morning it was supposed to begin. The manor had been ready to become something new, and instead became a mausoleum again. Bane came for Gotham in winter, and he came for the manor first. Not as a burglar, as a conqueror. His forces stormed the grounds on a Tuesday, 47 mercenaries in tactical gear, and Bruce was 900 miles away when it fell. By the time he saw the satellite feed, Bane was sitting in Thomas Wayne's chair, boots on the desk, declaring Wayne Manor the new seat of Gotham's government.
For 83 days, Bane held the house. He slept in Bruce's bed, ate at Alfred's table, turned the cave into an interrogation site and the library into a war room. His Lieutenant Flashpoint Batman patrolled the halls, left bloodstains on the marble Alfred had kept spotless for 40 years. They hung Gotham's resistance fighters from the balconies, broadcast their executions on every screen in the city. The manor became the symbol of everything Gotham had lost. Bruce built his strength in the desert, Selina at his side, planning the counterstrike. When they came back, it was with every ally still breathing, through the tunnels and over the walls, room by room, shadow by shadow. Taking back the manor meant burning out every corner Bane had touched. Alfred Pennyworth died on the library floor, Bane's hands around his throat, because he wouldn't give up Gotham's last safe houses. He was 68 years old. He'd served the Wayne family for 46 years, raised Bruce from 8, stitched every wound, kept every secret, stood in that doorway with tea and patience when the night went long. Bane snapped his neck like kindling and left him there for Bruce to find. The funeral was small. Damien didn't speak, couldn't. Dick gave the eulogy in the garden Alfred had planted, the same garden where he'd taught a 12-year-old circus boy how to prune roses and pretend a home could be normal. Bruce stood alone at the grave for 4 hours after everyone left. When he finally walked back inside, the manor echoed in a way it never had before. No one kept the clocks wound. No one answered the door. The kitchen stayed dark. The silver stayed tarnished. Dust gathered on the banisters Alfred had polished every Sunday for half a century. Bruce moved through the halls like a stranger, and for the first time in his life, the house felt bigger than him, colder, emptier than even the cave below. The manor still stood, but the man who made it a home was gone.
3 weeks later, Bruce stood in the sub-basement vault his grandfather had carved in 1923, staring at $847,000 in bearer bonds Alfred had quietly shifted into untraceable instruments over 40 years. The will was 2 pages long, every dollar converted and deployed through 11 shell foundations, would rebuild what Bane broke. Housing, clinics, the East End rec centers Thomas Wayne opened in 1974, and the city had let rot.
Alfred's last line was handwritten. Fund the city, not the mission. Let them see what a Wayne can build when he isn't hunting in the dark. Bruce signed the transfer orders at the desk where his father proposed to his mother, and Gotham got its second chance without ever knowing who paid for it.
That's Wayne Manor, not the ballroom or the portraits or even the cave, but the choice. It forces every generation, fortress or legacy, symbol or service, revenge or repair. Bruce made his. The manor still stands on the hill, lights burning again in the kitchen. But what it becomes next, that's a story for another night. If you want more deep dives into Gotham's hidden history, subscribe. The city's got more secrets than even Batman knows. Alfred polished the same 14 silver frames every Sunday for 50 years. After he died, Bruce found a 15th in the vault, empty, with a note tucked inside. For the day you stop,